If you catch a ribber needle that starts to knit for a few rows, and then drop the stitch off of that extra needle, it's going to leave a big loop, a bigger stitch in the main fabric that never goes away. However, like many things, if you take control of what's happening, we can turn it into a positive effect. And in this case, if I bring a group of needles into working position on the riverbed and allow them to knit for a number of rows and then drop those stitches off of the needles, I'm going to form an area within the main knitting with much larger stitches that I can use for patterning effect. You can drop those ribber stitches after every row or every 2 rows if you want to, or you can knit a number of rows and then drop them all at once. Either way, you're going to get some nice open stitches. Instead of a group of stitches, I could decide to bring every other needle on the riverbed into work and let the carriage knit in one or both directions and then drop the stitches off. And in that case, all of the extra length that I've accumulated on the ribber needles is going to be absorbed into the main bed stitches. They'll look a little bit paired as we look at the fabric here, but the truth of the matter is that it will even out afterwards, and it's a fairly easy way to knit drop stitch. You need to remember that a stitch can only drop to the point where it was cast on. So when you begin with all of your stitches on the main bed, any stitches that you add on the river bed later can be dropped without causing anything to drop in the main fabric. Now I'm going to work with all the needles on both beds, a full needle rib setup, and you'll see that the carriage is a lot harder to move than it was with a 1x1 setup on the river. I've got my stitch size set fairly large on both carriages, larger than I would for ribbing, because I want to create some really big stitches, much bigger than I could create with just the main carriage alone. And as we look at them, you'll see the contrast between the main bed stitches and those formed with drop stitch. It's a condo stitch is a really cool use of drop stitch. You need to set the ribber carriage to knit in one direction and slip in the other. And if you look at the face of your carriage, there's probably some kind of a setting to do this. On the silver reed carriages, there's a lever that has either a 1 or a 0. And when the leading edge of the carriage has the 1 selected, the carriage will knit in that direction. When the 0 is selected, it will slip in that direction. So this one is set to slip going from right to left and knit going left to right, and now I'll switch it the other way. Because the ribber carriage only knits in one direction, this is a lot easier physically to knit than the full needle rib example I showed you before. And I think in this close-up you can see that the yarn zigzags across the beds like a rib on one pass of the carriage, and on the next one knits just the main bed needles. Hand knit condo stitches worked with a large needle and a small needle in garter stitch, but this machine knit version comes pretty close. Last of all, I'd like to show you how I use drop stitch to facilitate a bind off with a really large stretchy edge. So I'm going to work just one row from left to right in this case, drop the ribber bed stitches, and then I'm going to cut the yarn. I'll drop the bed out of the way, give a tug on those stitches to open them up to their full size. And then I'm just going to use a latch tool to remove the stitches from one needle after the other, pulling one stitch through the next. And you can do it either by lifting the stitches off the needles as I'm doing here, or you might find it easier to bring the needles out to holding position and be able to pull the stitches through like this. And sometimes when I'm not trying to keep my hands clear for you to see what I'm doing, I'll actually just hook onto the hook of the hook of the tool onto the hook of the needle, and then just pull the needles back to deposit the stitches on the tool. Whatever works for you, however you'd normally do a latch tool bind off with no additional yarn added to the chain. And this, because of the large stitch size, will be a really stretchy bind off. Now let's take a look at some of the samples that we just knitted. First, I'll cut the ravel cord to pull away the waist knitting on that perfect cast-on edge that I showed you in a previous blog post. and reveal my beautiful rib edge there. And then I want you to notice where I left that single needle working on the riverbed and how it left a big ugly stitch that just didn't go away. Directly above that, there's a square of large stitches that were formed by leaving a group of 5 needles working on the riverbed and then dropping those stitches. And from the purl side, you can really see the bigger stitches. And when I turn the fabric over, I think you'll see that they're even more outstanding on the knit side. Next, you can see where I had every other needle working on the riverbed. And above that, there's a section that was worked as full needle rib, big stitches, both carriages knitting every row. And above that, the back side of the condo stitch where the riverbed knitted one row and slipped the next. And the difference is pretty obvious on the back of the fabric and equally as obvious on the front. So there's every other needle, every needle, and then condo stitch working up above it. Next time, when I come back, I'm going to show you how racking can be combined with drop stitch for some interesting patterns. See you then.